Commission titled Reimagining Social Justice, Past, Present, and Future Considerations. Thank you all for being a part of this dynamic and timely conversation. We honor your presence, and we are pleased to have you here with us this evening. You know, as educators, we are liberators. We set free the genius that often lies dormant within us. We nourish and we nurture hearts and minds with food for the soul. We sustain people with knowledge that moves humanity forward. And this is especially true for people who have been historically marginalized. And for African American people, educators have led our movements for social justice. Booker T. Washington, W.E.B. Du Bois, Carter G. Woodson, Mary McLeod Bethune, all of these pioneers represent the lineage of African American people, African American educators who sit before us today, to lead the charge to create a more humane, a more equitable, and a more just society. So before we get started, before we go any further, I just want to tell everybody to consider the sound quality that is behind you, to mute yourself so that everybody can get the full benefit of our discussion this evening. You know, when we're on Zoom, just the rattling of paper can sound like the movement of a truck. So just be mindful of your sound, and we thank you for that. I'm going to introduce Dr. Greg Seaton first. Dr. Greg Seaton brings over 20 years of experience teaching and supporting the developmental and academic outcomes of youth, particularly urban males. Currently, he is an associate director at JFF, where he focuses on supporting state, regional, and local organizations in building better systems to support support young people's transition from high school to a post-secondary credential to careers. Formerly, he was an associate professor of the college at the College of New Jersey in the Department of Education Administration and Secondary Education. He taught educational psychology, adolescent learning and development, and research methods to teachers. Dr. Seaton holds a master's degree from Harvard University and a doctorate in educational leadership and human development from the University of Pennsylvania. Dr. Khalid Mumeen. For over 20 years, Dr. Khalid Mumeen has served in various capacities as a teacher, a dean of students, a principal, and a central administrator. As a visionary change agent, he is committed to promoting and sustaining student achievement, equity, and access to educational programming for all students. He holds a Doctor of Education in Educational Leadership from the University of Pennsylvania, a Master of Education in Teaching and Curriculum from Pennsylvania State University, and a Bachelor of Arts in Secondary English Education from Shippensburg University. And next we have Thomas Parker. Thomas E. Parker has a dedicated career, which includes serving as a high school and middle school principal, founding principal of 2 academies, assistant principal, dean of students, interim curriculum leader, teacher, and program coordinator of Horizons Upward Bound. Currently, Mr. Parker serves as the superintendent for the Allentown School District, where his focus is preparing students to be college and career ready with an emphasis on middle school transformation. Mr. Parker holds an educational specialist in educational leadership degree from Eastern Michigan University, a Master of Arts in Educational Foundation and Policy from the University of Michigan, and a Bachelor of Arts in History and Secondary Education from Howard University. Next, we have Dr. Khalil Dasak. Dr. Khalil Dasak is a career educator with nearly 2 decades of public education experience at the school, district, and state levels. Since 2017, he has served as the Director of School Improvement with the Pennsylvania Department of Education. He also serves as an adjunct professor of humanities and Communication with Penn State University. Dr. Desac holds a bachelor's degree in sociology from Hampton University, a master's degree in curriculum and instruction from McDaniel College, and a doctorate in educational leadership from the Partnership Program at Millersville and Shippensburg Universities. And finally, but not least, we have Mr. Chad Dion Lassiter. Chad Dion Lassiter is the Executive Director of the Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission, our host for this evening. He is an international expert on race relations, peace, and poverty, having served in Africa, Israel, Haiti, and Norway. Mr. Lassiter is nationally recognized in the field of American race relations and violence prevention among African American males. He has worked with resilient and vulnerable families, youth, and communities as they experience normal developmental transitions in challenging environments. He holds a master's degree from the University of Pennsylvania Graduate School of Social Work. And me, I am Layla Dunbar-Keys. I am currently an adjunct assistant professor of sociology at Community College of Philadelphia, and I will be your moderator this evening. Again, thank you everyone for your presence. I welcome you to tonight's discussion. Thank you so much. So we're going to get started just asking some basic questions about what has made you who you are. We'd just like for you to all tell us just a little bit about your coming of age story.
Amen.
The context in which you grew up and how did you come to this work. So we're going to begin with Dr. Greg Seaton. Dr. Seaton, just tell us a little bit about you tonight.
Hey, well, first of all, just glad to be here with such an esteemed panel and moderators, and glad to see all the participation on the Zoom call tonight. I think to capture it is that I am a product of my community, in the sense that grew up in a home where addiction was an issue. What made the difference for me was having safe places where I was both challenged and supported, where folks recognized the greatness within me, whether I was displaying it or recognized it myself, and they challenged me to develop it and distribute it. So in many ways, I am the product of folks caring, folks that were blood related and not, and holding me accountable.
Thank you so much for sharing that story. It's important that everyone can hear so everyone knows their place in the world and knows that they have the potential and the possibilities to do whatever it is that they want to do. So thank you, Dr. Seaton. Dr. Amin, I'd like to first congratulate you on your new book, Problem Child. And we know that this book actually chronicles your life growing up in Philadelphia. So would you like to tell us a bit about the book and also within the context of how it chronicles your life?
Yes, thank you so much. First and foremost, I'm very humble and thankful to be on this panel this evening. As I'm looking at some of the names on the screen, there's some familiar faces and names on this screen, and my story per se is all about how did I was able to navigate some of the ills of poverty. One of my very close and best friends is on this screen, which is Mr. Chad Dion Lassiter. And we always tell these stories that in ninth grade, before we were extremely athletic, we were the 14th and 15th man on our basketball team. Now it depends how the coach felt about us. Sometimes Chad was number 14 and I was number 15. Needless to say, we weren't getting any time in ninth grade. We were bench warmers, so we decided to take that time to figure out how we're going to change the world. More specific, how we're going to change Logan and Hunting Park, which are two of the poorest demographics, socioeconomic demographics in the city of Philadelphia, and have been that way since the late 60s. So to navigate out of those conditions, one, you need a strong family structure. And I had a strong family structure, which my mother lived on 8th Street where I was raised, and my dad lived on 12th Street. And I say it this way: I got love and discipline on 8th Street, and then I got love and discipline on 12th Street. Needless to say, that was a, you know, what we look at the jargon now. That's a non-traditional home setting. Single parent living in poverty, you're doomed. No, this was a non-traditional home setting because both homes had love and I was surrounded by love. Moving forward, I was very, I was, not was, but I am very blessed to have great mentors in my life. And my mentors began with some of the neighborhood guys who were protecting us from the violence and crime in the neighborhood, to my teachers at Olney High. And moving through college, I always was able to pick up good mentors who were able to see a future for me that I really could not see. Some of the things about coming up in an environment, especially living in poverty, many of the kids are carpe diem. We live for the day. So to have an adult speaking about my future was always so motivating. That road, that journey has taken me from Logan to the University of Pennsylvania. And along the way, I've picked up some great mentors. One of my mentors is on this screen now, Dr. Fowler. I saw him earlier, Jerry Fowler, who we've met, and we kept running the race in regards to equity and social justice. So my story is one of creating a community of support around me in regards to a force field that actually kept me protected so that I could aspire to infinite possibilities of success. And that's what Problem Child is all about. There are 3 prongs: one prong for the superintendents, another prong for building level leaders, next prong for teachers, and then a prong for students, because student voice is so important in this process.
Thank you, Dr. Mumeen. Thank you for that book. I'm sure it will be a blessing to a lot of people, and it will act as mentorship to them as they read it. So thank you for that. Thank you for sharing.
My pleasure.
Dr. Thomas Parker, tell us a bit about you and how you came to be who you are as an educator and what brought you to this work.
Good afternoon. Thank you for the invite and the opportunity. And again, with such an esteemed panel, I am absolutely excited and proud to be here with these gentlemen and you, Dr. Dunbar Keys as well. So my journey is totally different and exactly the same as the other people on the panel. And I was looking through my backgrounds earlier, and I decided to put this background up because when I tell my story is a little bit different. This is the front of my house. I grew up on a farm in Mississippi in a town with 95 people in the entire town, Tillatoba, Mississippi, right? So I had an opportunity to live and experience life not in an urban area, but in a rural area where the conditions were often the same when you have people that were living in spaces with poverty and not having a lot of resources. What happened for me, as is what I've already heard and will hear from the rest of the panel, is that there was a village, right? So not only was it the people who lived inside my house who cared for me and ensured that I had the aspiration for success, but there was a village outside of home, and that community became so key and critical in driving out success and what that looked like for me. Not people who had seen or been to college, but people who knew that that's where I'd better go, or I was going to be living on that farm and working for the next 40, 50 years of life. So my story is one of growing up and living in rural Mississippi and accidentally getting a scholarship opportunity to attend Howard University. And that just changed the trajectory of my life. I like to tell folks I was going into forestry and found education almost by accident, and knew that it was my passion to change conditions for kids, to create a village for kids in schools so that they had a village like I had at home in my community, even if they didn't have that already existing for them. So that took me through the University of Michigan and to Detroit and becoming a teacher in one of the poorest schools in Detroit. But it really set for me the foundation as an educator that my goal, my passion, my mission in life was to create outcomes and equity for children so that they could dream their greatest dream. And that's the work that I've been doing and partnering with great leaders across the nation to do here over my career. So again, it's about the village. I had my parents, I had my uncles. We didn't have money, we didn't have resources, but we had passion and we had desire. If we put passion and desire and mix in the hard work and the effort, we found ways to be successful. And building a village around the children that I serve here in Allentown is really about the same thing. How do we create resources so that they can connect their passion and they can connect their vision with the hard work that's required after we move some of those roadblocks of equity out of the way so that they can dream their greatest dream and find success. So the young fella that you see up there, don't talk about the gold herringbone. That was Ian back in the day. I just want you to know the herringbone was Ian. But that fella there didn't make it anywhere based on his merits, his knowledge, his ability. But there was a village that set the floor for me and allowed me to dream. And that's what we do for the kids that we serve. And that's what social justice is for me and for us, creating spaces and opportunities for those kids.
Thank you, Mr. Parker, for emphasizing the village and for committing your life to being an essential part of that village. Thank you for sharing. Dr. Khalil Dasak, tell us a bit about your journey.
Well, good evening, everyone, and thank you again for spending time with us. And it's indeed an honor and a privilege to serve on this panel. And thank you again to Executive Director Lassiter for facilitating such an opportunity. My story, and each one of us have an individual story, and my story is very unique. My maternal grandparents moved to Harlem, New York in the early 1940s. So, World War II, post-Harlem Renaissance, that sort of thing. And they, went to New York for a better life and for an opportunity. And, my grandmother aspired to be a teacher, but in the Jim Crow South, in Charleston, South Carolina, that wasn't attainable or achievable. I'm a second generation educator. My mother and my brother are both special educators in the New York City public school system. And my story is that education has really afforded me the opportunities for empowerment and upward mobility. I grew up in the housing projects of New York. I grew up inner city, Bronx, New York. Poverty, drugs, crime, all of those things was very rampant around my periphery, but again, it didn't impact my family because my family prioritized the importance of education and the importance of family. And again, my story is very similar to the gentleman that spoke before me with regards to that wraparound service, that family, that community. My father came to this country from Georgetown, Guyana, in the late 1960s with hopes of for a better education and a better life. So, I am the product of a lot of people's hard work and a lot of people's dreams that fortunately and as a blessing was able to be manifest through me and hopefully through my son and through my brothers and so forth. So, our role and our experience is to give back. And we want others to have, my personal charge and purpose, I feel, is to ensure that students, locally, statewide, and nationally have the opportunity to have enriching, empowering educational experiences so that they can take control of their lives and it can be an opportunity for upward mobility and empowerment for themselves and others.
Thank you so much, Dr. Dasak. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you.
And then last but not least again, Mr. Chad Dion Lassiter, please tell us your story so that everybody can be blessed by it.
Yes, certainly. And echoing the same sentiments as the previous speakers, I'm fundamentally honored as well as humbled to be in this space. Very emotional evening for me because I'm with my childhood best friend, Dr. Mameen, who I looked up to even in high school. Even though I've had an established career, that's my guy. Helped me through a lot of childhood insecurities. And then also my dear brother, Greg Seaton, who I've known for 20 years, our sojourn at the University of Penn. And then, of course, you, Layla, who I've known for 20 years as well. And also Brother Parker and Brother DeQuay as well. So I came of age on two different coasts. I have a tattoo here that says 213. I lived in Los Angeles from the 1976 to 1985. My mom was working on a degree, her second degree at the University of Southern California after having received a degree at the University of Penn. And then on this arm, I have a tattoo that says 215, University, Philadelphia. So living on the West Coast, seeing Bloods and Crips, living in Philadelphia, where I was born and raised. I came of age, just like Khalid said, in HP, Hunting Park, looking at the landscape of suffering, and not necessarily my own suffering, like trying to fundamentally understand why is it that you have a segment of your family that are educators and a segment of your family that are either drug dealers, Eighth and Butler, or are incarcerated. And we grew up, but we didn't fundamentally know that we were poor because we had pride. So there was a lot of pride in our community. But the park that I lived in front of was called Hunting Park, and that served as a landscape for crime, poverty, environmental racism, in the sense that people would just leave tires in and around the area where we played basketball. It was at the height of the crack epidemic that impacted my family. It also was a time where the first childhood trauma was something that I experienced, and Khalid experienced that too, with a friend of ours who, you talk about a village. When we were growing up, the African proverb that it takes a village to raise a child was true. Now in the era that we find ourselves in, it takes a healthy village to raise a healthy child, and not a lot of our villages are healthy. But we had a childhood friend by the name of Russell Mason that, had a caring, loving family, but just ended up engaging in, the selling of drugs. And, our 12th grade year, it was the first time I was ever introduced to that form of trauma, and that Russell was in a vehicle that was set on fire by rival drug dealers. So Khalid and I are graduating from high school without our childhood friend who went to high school with us as well. The village for me was a caring village. The Black church played a pivotal role. So for me, it was growing up in a African-American community that was engaging, that was really, really centered around, making sure that you actually were responsible for some of your actions. The drug dealers also raised us. The drug dealers told us, don't be like us. Khalid was an amazing basketball player. I had a good jump shot, but I didn't have, basketball aspirations. But the drug dealers made sure that nobody touched us in the community. That led from me graduating from Onley High and headed off to Johnson C. Smith, a historical Black college and university in Charlotte, North Carolina, on academic scholarship, coming back to Philadelphia, and then proceeding with my graduate work at the University of Penn. Always knew that I was going to come back to Philadelphia and make my community better to the best of my ability. So it was a healthy village. It was a caring mother. It was a loving father who suffered from PTSD because he did 3 tours in Vietnam. But similar to what you're hearing here with all these themes, it was a loving community. My Sunday school teachers put their arms around me. The drug dealers put their arms around me. Uncles and aunts put their arms around me. And I had 2 grandmothers who were domestic workers who always promoted education, always told me about, being something larger than myself, and imagining the world differently, and recognizing that God had given me certain gifts, even at a young age, to uniquely and innovatively feel the pain and suffering of others and translate that pain, take that pain in, and develop it in a way where I could actually use my life as a vehicle to alleviate the suffering of others. I have nothing but just fond memories of growing up in Hunting Park. It made me resilient, and it made me the human being that I am right here at this very moment on Zoom.
Thank you, Mr. Lassiter. We definitely appreciate that. And I'd like to invoke the words of ancestor abolitionist Frederick Douglass, who said, "It is easier to build strong children than to repair broken men." And it looks like our esteemed panelists all agree that that is true, and they have committed their lives to building strong children so that they do not have to repair broken men. And so we thank you for that. Turning again to Dr. Greg Seaton. Dr. Seaton, I find myself every day declaring that George Floyd's death will not be in vain. Our society has conditioned everyone to fear the Black male body. And we see that outpicturing of this fear in society every day. Many social scientists would argue that Black men are the most feared men on the planet. And certainly some might disagree with that. But what we know for sure is that Black men have been systemically fractured. So the holistic wellness of Black men is essential for the stability of the African American community. What needs to be done to contribute to the fortification of the fractured identities of young Black men?
I think that's an amazing question. And I like the grounding in holistic identity. And I think a interesting place to start, or a generative place to start, is around how we as Black men think about masculinity, what it means to be male. So one, I think we have to create spaces for young brothers to reflect about not just how they're perceived in the world, but how they want to show up. Because I think in many cases, Dunbar's "We Wear the Mask," we've been wearing the mask so long that we believe that the mask is either our identity or our culture, when the mask is really a coping mechanism. And so one, having an opportunity for young men to be able to be safe and critically reflective around a lot of the BS that we've been sold around what it means to be Black and male. Because I think in some respects, we have internalized a lot of the negative stuff, not just about ourselves, but also about one another. So where can we sort of safely deconstruct that? I don't think that we begin to refine our image for ourselves or for others in the absence of that interrogation. And then the other starting point that I think we need to deal with is this whole structural piece in terms of the connection between education and work. Although pre-COVID, we heard about the Blacks and all of that low unemployment level, I think having structures or challenging schools to, one, provide opportunities for young males and girls in particular to explore career and vocational identities, and understanding that in this day and age, college is not the only path, and that is okay. There are so many careers that pay life-sustaining wages where you don't have to go to college. You can get a good job where you don't have to engage in all these other behaviors. And you don't necessarily have to spend a lot of time, energy, or resources on a college education, but you can do it on the muscle in a career that allows you to take care of yourself and others. So I'm really thinking about and focusing on how we connect brothers to work, but also how we get brothers to critically reflect on how they cope and deal with stress and create productive, adaptive identities.
I love that you said that. There was a time when I was working in college prep and I said the exact same thing. It wasn't popular then. It was about 20 years ago or so. And it wasn't popular at all. But career and technical education is definitely a viable option for so many. Thank
Yeah,
you.
thank you.
Dr. Mumeen, you know, a lot of this conditioning against Black people and Black males happens within the traditional educational spheres. Our curriculum is Eurocentric, our instruction often is Eurocentric, and Eurocentric doesn't necessarily have to be anti-Black, but sometimes it turns out to be exactly that. So what needs to be done with curriculum, instruction, and activities to liberate our children's mind from this stronghold of what we know in critical race theory is called internalized racial oppression?
Right. First and foremost, you have to recognize the history and how education derived. And when you start to unpack education from the late 1800s to now, education was not meant to be inclusive.
Yes.
Traditional education was not meant to be inclusive, but we still operate within very traditional systems. While we're unpacking that and you start looking at the history, the years and the different movements through education, the time, education, you have to begin to unpack some of the underlying issues that occur where you have people who write texts that celebrate some of the history of marginalization and also looking at cultures and ethnicities. One text that really resonates with me, that really was a game changer and will help me to unpack this answer, is the bell curve theory. And when you think of the bell curve theory, and that was Richard Herstein, when talking about, you can take a chart and basically say, okay, poverty, check, African American, check, male, check, this young person is going to become this. And to look at those theories, and it was a bestseller, by the way, that means that there's a lot of belief around those notions.
Right.
So how do you impact the system? You have to make sure that education is practical. It has to be practical. There has to be imagery and humanistic qualities about education where it's mapped on to the individual students. You have to push against tradition. You have to change the narrative. Something as simplistic as having curriculum and text where there are actually characters in those texts that look like the kids that are being served from an educational standpoint is huge. There has to be tools in regards to professional development for us as leaders, classroom leaders, to be able to have a keen ear and understanding of the communities that we serve. You can't lead a contingent or a contingency of young people that you don't know.
Yes.
You have to listen and get to know them. That's, it is more than just stand and deliver pedagogy. It has to be pieces put into the grand plan within school districts where you have to encourage that dialogue between adults and children. You have to not sensationalize the gap in parent involvement, because that's a very traditional term. You have to look at ways to say, okay, parent involvement, we set up shop here at the school and parents aren't visiting. Maybe we have to shift to parent engagement. Our parents are very active on social media. We have to meet them where they are. You have to create systems that the parents are able to reciprocate information with the school system, which in turn helps the student.
Yeah.
Lastly, you have to continue, and it was part of my story, you have to continue to believe in young people, even when it's easy to believe in them when they're at their best. You have to believe in them when they're at their worst times and try to unpack the layers of why they are in that spot at that time. Case in point, and I'll end on this. Part of my story was that, you know, when I was in high school, my first time around in ninth grade, I went to Frankfurt High. And the reason why I was in Frankfurt High, because Brown versus the Board of Education, 1954, stated that school districts need to make deliberate efforts in diversifying schools. Well, deliberate in the city of Philadelphia was 1983 or 82. So it was the School Desegregation Act. So basically, they picked me up out of my neighborhood and put me in the Northeast to go to school, and it was a disaster.
Mm-hmm.
Part of the system, and it, you know, got to a fight, got suspended, kept beating the suspension letters home. I was out of school for 75 days before the court system caught up with me. By then, I'm doomed.
Yes.
75 days. No phone call to the house, no checking in with the social worker to see if I really live in the house where was I a resident of the house that was on my student records. It was till I got to the juvenile criminal court system, to when things were like, it's either put up or shut up now. Either you're going to go X to Slayton Farms, or we're going to give you another chance, and you get to go to your neighborhood high school, Alney High, and try to rewrite your story. So there has to be supports in place, a continuity of supports in place to help our children along the pathways, because it's easy, it's very easy to support students when they're at their best. But unpacking this for a system where you have measures and procedures in place to identify, not identify talking about the labels, but identify when students are in need and being able to offer those supports ASAP. That has to be a part of our fabric in education.
Yes, thank you so much. You know, we don't give students enough credit. Students are very intuitive, and they pick up on the love and caring that is in the environment. That love and caring that's coming from their teachers and their administrators. Dr. Joy DeGroot in Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome, she talks about the fact that Black children in particular really respond to the way in which administrators and teachers actually see them. So we have to see them as if they are ours, and they respond to that love. There's an area of leadership called love leadership. And so when we move through this work that we do, the social justice, that work that we do with love, and we embrace our students as if they're our own, they respond to that and they follow. Thank you for that story. I really do appreciate that. Thank you so much. And so Mr. Parker, following along in that vein, the average teacher now is a 20-something white female with very little experience with people outside of her own culture. And not that that's problematic, but as we are seeing more now than ever before, because people are engaging in this work of diversity, equity, and inclusion, people are reading books like How to Be an Anti-Racist, and So You Want to Talk About Race. We understand that these biases happen on a deeply subconscious level, and so people have to confront those biases in order to transcend them. So as a result, we have overt and covert racist policies that are infused into curriculum and instruction. What needs to be done? What are you working on perhaps to train teachers to be more equitable, more inclusive, more culturally responsive, to create anti-biased and anti-racist environments?
All right, so thank you. I guess I'll go sideways on this a little bit. I think the primary issue there is, and I heard someone say earlier, representation. So absolutely, we know what the numbers are. I think it's something like 4% of teachers in the Commonwealth are teachers of color, or something similar to that, right? So we know that there are issues. I think the first thing that we have to do is understand and recognize the representation is critical and important, and that as educational leaders, we have to, and I think Dr. Momin just said it perfectly, we have to challenge the norm. So first and foremost, how do we ensure that in those teacher ranks, in those principal ranks, in those leadership ranks, we begin to bring people who are not the norm into those spaces to be those leaders, to be those teachers, and first and foremost, begin challenging the norm and creating diverse spaces and diverse leaders in our classrooms. I think that for me is foremost and critical. And our approach in Allentown has been to really develop and push diversity as a core. Now that as one piece, one component, one avenue, as we look at what happens in our individual classrooms with the demographics of teachers that we have and demographics of students that we have, I think there's some recognition and acknowledgement of relationships and the challenges that we see, especially in urban environments, with that juxtaposition of race and class with our teachers as well as our students. We're looking to continue. We started the implementation of a district-wide restorative practices initiative specifically to address some of those issues. We have really hardworking and well-meaning teachers, and we have hardworking and well-meaning kids and parents, but often some of those covert and overt issues of race and class that enter our classrooms are things that we have to create safe spaces for people to talk about, to discuss, and ultimately to address the way that we build our classrooms to be a space for kids of all races and colors to find their ability to dream and to be successful on a day-to-day basis. So I think that becomes the really critical element. From a professional development, professional growth standpoint, how do we begin to provide professional learning, professional development, and create safe spaces for our staff members who may or may not be contributing to, who may or may not be knowingly contributing to a classroom or school environment that is oppressive to students, to be able to understand, acknowledge, and address that in a meaningful way. For us, it's really been starting with that district-wide focus on restorative practices, creating spaces in our classrooms and in our buildings where we value all. And for us, that's been a significant shift because Allentown, much like many other districts in the Commonwealth, we serve a population of students that are 75% Latinx, 15% African American, but the overwhelming majority of our instructional staff and leadership staff are white. So it's there, it's visible. So ensuring that all of our leaders and our teachers have the tools to see, understand, acknowledge, and address any bias in our facilities, in our classrooms, in our structures is critical. And then giving them the tools to address it is critical as well. And I'll add one more piece to that. Okay. And it's that, I don't think the issues in all of these spaces is what happens at the teacher level. We often speak about what happens at the teacher and the school level, but culture is organizational and it begins at the top, right? So how do we invest? I taught resource allocation. Resource allocation becomes the real key factor when we talk about addressing any issues of bias, covert or overt, in our classrooms and in our schools. So from the board, from the superintendent level, where are we valuing in our organization diversity? Where are we valuing equity as an organizational concept? Because if we, as the leaders of the organization, place value there, then it's easy for the building level leaders, the teachers, the students to kind of continue that path. But we have to shift that culture at the highest levels of the organization. And we have to do that first to be credible in asking or demanding that building level folk begin to shift and be more responsive to the needs of kids.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much for sharing. And in that same vein, Dr. Desac, sociologist William Julius Wilson said that there are both structural and cultural dynamics that affect the growth inequities that Black men face. And so these inequities are inequities in education, inequities in employment, inequities in housing, inequities in banking and economics, etc. And certainly inequities in justice. So what changes need to be made to curriculum and instruction, administration even, to assist young Black men with navigating through these growth inequities, particularly if they're both structural or systemic and cultural, which is assuming they're personal responsibility based. So, yes.
That's a great question, and it's going to piggyback off of a lot of some of the things that Superintendent Parker just shared that he's doing in his district. Is, you know, when William Julius Wilson, you know, conducted his study in the late 80s, a lot of the concerns that was happening in inner city Chicago was very emblematic of what's going on today in a lot of our urban hubs across the country, and even filtering into some of our suburban and rural communities, because some of the plights that he spoke about or that he uncovered in his study that was happening in Chicago is also happening in suburbia as well as in rural America today in 2020. So, you know, when you talk about the shift of the workforce, where in Chicago at the time, the manufacturing jobs and a lot of the blue collar union jobs shifted to low wage service industry positions where persons of color were disenfranchised and underemployed and underpaid and overextended. So a lot of these themes that occurred, you know, a generation ago is also happening again today, and a lot of the problems and plights that impact students is very parallel or analogous to what happened back then. And we saw the decay of the Black household, the Black family, and the impact that it had to students, because they brought this baggage and they brought these challenges into school with them. And, you know, teachers and principals and educators had to figure it out. And at the time, you know, many were not well equipped by the school districts or by the colleges or whatever to be able to address the needs of the students by dealing with those non-academic needs. How do you address that? How do you fill those non-academic voids to then move to really challenging the students' academics and intelligence and that sort of thing? So that brings me to the point, Professor Dunbar-Keys, is what changes need to be made? So in no specific order, I'm just going to highlight some things. First and foremost, the curricular and the pedagogical processes need to shift away from job training. So the days of job training and giving students the skills they need for just the workforce is not enough, right? How do we teach and grow a well-rounded individual to meet their academic and non-academic needs? We want students to be able to compete on a global economy, not just in their localized communities. So a shift away from job training. We need to cultivate the abilities of critical thinking skills and problem-solving skills. You know, students should not just be taught, you know, how to think critically, either at the secondary level or at the collegiate level, but, you know, very, very early in the educational process. And it should be something that's cyclical from grade to grade. You know, we should be teaching critical thinking skills and problem solving skills at each level: elementary school, middle school, high school, and on to the collegiate level. You know, working in inquiry-based learning, right? Not just pushing standards onto kids that this is what the adults think, or these are what the educators think that you need to know. But what is it that you're interested in? And how can we challenge and foster and nurture those things that you want to learn, and those that inquisitiveness that you have, and how do we build on that? And you have a zest and desire to not only learn about new topics, but to go out and have a pathway to be able to seek out that knowledge in a very meaningful and growth-oriented way. Differentiating our learning experiences for kids. No two learners are identical. We know that Howard Gardner's theory of multiple intelligences, there's a wide array of student learners. We can't teach to just one modality. So we have to differentiate our instruction, because no two kids are alike. So we need to make sure that we're giving students multiple learning experiences as much as possible, so that we can create, as many well-rounded students as possible. But also, we need to also get away from the traditional rote ways of teaching and learning, or teaching, I should say, and be able to teach students real 21st century skills that they're going to need, not only in their personal, but also their professional lives. Whether we're talking about STEM-related topics such as coding and issues around IT, or topics around IT, teaching kids about finance, their credit, home buying, balancing checkbooks, credit, things, real tangible skills. It's one thing to go into school and you memorize what the Magna Carta is. And there's another thing where, how is this going to apply to my 21st century needs and skills and job opportunities right now? We need to also make sure that we teach kids the foundational information, but in the same token, we need to give them the skills that they need. Because what happens when we reach them at, those of us who, on the panel and in the audience, when students reach a collegiate level, and then we have to form a bridge plan for them, because they have certain prerequisites that they need in order to be successful. But in that K-12 education, we didn't give it to them, but they know how to do a Punnett square. How does that apply to what it is that I need to do to be effective, in the workplace, or, skills that I'm going to be able to utilize to advance my learning or my kids' learning or whatever have you. We need to teach children how to invest in entrepreneurship and all of the different things that, we are part of a capitalist system, and we can't just thrust kids into a capitalist world and think they're going to be successful. You have to give them the opportunities, the exposures, and you have to explicitly teach them so that they don't have to reactively learn, but they can proactively learn and be able to implement the skills that they require in schools.
If you just joined us, please put yourself on mute.
Thank you, Dr. Desac, and thank you, Mr. Lassiter, for reminding our audience to keep themselves muted so that everyone can have the best experience tonight, so that everyone can hear from our esteemed panelists with no interruptions. Dr. Desac, thank you so much for sharing. That was very thorough. You spoke in ways that really cover everything that is required to create a holistic student, a holistic child, to prepare them for the 21st century, to prepare them for our new culture, our new world. So thank you very much. Mr. Lassiter, you're next. And so this just kind of picks right up where we left off with Dr. Desac. Malcolm X's famous quote is that education is the passport to our future, or tomorrow belongs to those who prepare for it today. I'm not sure if Malcolm meant academics, but I'm sure that he meant holistic education. But Black people have always been committed to this idea of education, particularly post-emancipation, post-civil rights. We really did think that education was the great equalizer. And so today, 20 years into the 21st century, do Malcolm's words still ring true?
Well, one, I think for me, it's looking at degrees of education. And I first start from African psychology and Dr. Naeem Akbar's work, Know Thyself. So I think the highest form of education begins with us knowing who we are as a people. I think oftentimes in various communities, but specifically the African American community, there are times in which we'll say, they're not teaching my child this. The first educator should be the home, should be the community. And so we move from know thyself to understanding that we have to deprogram all of the Eurocentric ways that we've been educated. And so what comes to me after the Naeem Akbar's work, African psychology, is Carter G. Woodson's work, The Miseducation of the Negro. Then what I do is I move from there into W.E.B. Du Bois's The Education of Black Folks. And the reason why that's all important for me is because I think it's really both and. I think when we're talking about how do we get our young people, specifically Black and Brown, to compete in a global market economy, one of the ways that we have to do that is to acknowledge what Howard Stevenson calls the racial elephants through racial literacy in the classroom. So young people are not just dropping out. Young people are being pushed out. The curriculum is not culturally affirming. We know that we have the school to prison pipeline. We know that through the racial gaze of unconscious bias or outright white supremacist ideology, there are some white teachers who will see a 10-year-old Black or brown male or female, and the imagery, because of the racial veil, is that they're actually older and much more threatening than they actually are. These are our babies. When you think about what happened in South Carolina with the resource police officer who ended up coming into the classroom in Charleston, and the young girl was holding on to the desk and they wanted her to get up, and he actually lifted her up by the desk and body slammed her. If anyone has not seen that, please Google it. Look at the YouTube clip. It was right on the heels of, Walter Scott running from the police and got shot in the back. And we argued, why is he running from the police? But we didn't argue why was that police officer patrolling while racist. So for me, I hearken back to when Greg and I were at the University of Penn with the W.E.B. Du Bois Collective Research Institute. We had an initiative that was sponsored by the National Institute of Mental Health. And this was called HIP, Health Information Providers and Promoters, where we worked in 16 Philadelphia schools, and we worked in a Trenton Central High School. And incentive-based learning, we actually were paying young people to come to an after-school program where they were learning advocacy around hypertension, type 1, type 2 diabetes, how to advocate for supermarkets in their community against the backdrop of food deserts. And these young people actually, because of the poverty rates and the economic conditions, were able to take the funding that they got from being in this after-school program, and they were able to pay a light bill. So they moved from being resource takers to resource providers. And so I think one of the things that we have to do is, as Thomas Parker stated, we have to tap into the genius of youth, right? And so we need to tap into the entrepreneurial spirit. When we talk about both and, it becomes maybe a 2-year college is necessary. But right now, while we're on this call, if I was to experience a flood in my house, the plumber, the amount that he's making per hour might be more than some of us who have a PhD, a MD, a master's, a JD, or a bachelor's degree. And so, from the work that you've done for a considerable period of time at Community College of Philadelphia, there are some individuals who are at trade schools and things of that nature, and they go on to open up mechanic shops, or they go on to be truck drivers. And so when Malcolm talks about that, I fundamentally believe from a social work theory perspective, he was talking about PI, person and environment. And how do we juxtapose that against the backdrop of, yeah, it's good to have a 4-year college, but think about the process of where we are now, the context. I was reading in the Chronicles of Higher Education, take a university like Boston College. They will have a $246 million educational shortfall. $246 million. And so young people are saying to themselves, why should I, take my courses online when I can go to Nova Scotia? I can go to the University of Phoenix. I can go to Capella, and so I think that what we have to do is, what we're saying, or what young people are saying to us is, I have my passport, but where can I go? And what we have to do is treat their education, and this is some of the work of Dr. Jack Washington, White Collar Factory, where our young people in certain schools, because of educational apartheid, are coming out not prepared in a global market economy. And so that's why cybersecurity certificates and programs become really advantageous. That's why for us to sit down and talk to young people about what their interests are. You know, is it going to be something where college is going to be something that they want? A lot of young people have musical genius in them. A lot of them have, you know, all types of genius in them, and it's our job to bring that out. And then lastly, you know, the whole notion that, and for me, I've told students this when I was a professor at Penn and Westchester, don't attend all your classes and miss your true education. I had a young man that every class I would come into, he was making beats. And I would say to him, what's that? And he was like, I made beats, Professor Lasser. And I was like, man, really? By the second class, I said, why are you in school? He said, what do you think? I said, you should drop out and head to wherever you need to head to and get started with making these beats. Unbeknownst to me, the following class, I didn't know he actually was going to take my advice. But he went on to really be great in writing music. And so, you know, that just goes to show you that there's a lot of talent, there's a lot of genius. I think what Malcolm was saying is holistic education. We certainly need to deal with the racial literacy, the racial elephants, the way we fund schools like a Lower Marion, and then the way we don't fund schools like a Strawberry Mansion. So I think that it's our job as educators, but also not just because we have the pedagogy and the credentials behind our name, but what Pablo Freire says when he's talking about a pedagogy of the oppressed, that we have to move education to a point where it's not rote memorization, but it becomes student-centered. So young people should be telling us, these are some of the things that I want you to teach me that makes it culturally relevant for the moment that they find themselves in.
Yes, thank you. What you're saying is making me think about some of the debates and arguments we would get into in college about the Du Boisian versus the Washingtonian process. So are we supposed to be the talented 10th, or are we supposed to go to school and get blue-collar jobs, agricultural jobs, and become entrepreneurs? And that was never intended in my mind to be an either-or debate. It's a both-and debate. And here we are in the 21st century, knowing full well that we have to do both. And so the idea is really to tap into our genius that lives inside of us. And that's what we're all here to do. So thank you very much, Mr. Lassiter, for that. Mr. Parker, back to you. Whether or not education continues to be the great equalizer, whether or not Malcolm's words ring true, or whether or not we have to engage in something that is much more holistic, as Mr. Lassiter said, pie. We must acknowledge that the world is changing, and many parents of our students are not equipped to advise their children because the world is so different than what it was for them, and also because it's changing at such a rapid pace. Many of the jobs that the parents were prepared for will no longer exist. Some don't exist now. And so what needs to be done to prepare our youth specifically for the opportunities of the 21st century?
Thank you. I absolutely love this question, this conversation, because this is where I'll answer the question, and I will agree but slightly disagree with some of my colleagues here, and I'll do so to a specific point. I think what we have to do as we move forward into the next century is really focus on building back social capital. Everybody knows social capital theory, right? So we have to focus on really building social capital for our students and ensuring that they have the ability to transition into careers. But and this is where I'll say the disagree is just slightly, what we speak, but sometimes they don't hear, is that they need to transition into a career opportunity, but still prepare to be flexible and shift that career over time as necessary. So absolutely transition, go after pursue the career tech opportunities, the STEM opportunities, absolutely great. Go to the training program, but while you're there, also continue your education to have that degree so that when the world changes in another 10 years, 15 years, you have the ability to transition your skills to another career if necessary. What I think a lot of our children miss as we say this is they miss that social capital that a lot of us have been privy to have the opportunity to get, in that let's get the job, but also prepare for what happens when this job ends or the industry changes. And that's what we're facing now. And that's what, as technology continues to grow, our children will continue to face at an even greater clip in the future, is how do you ensure that you can prepare, process, and proceed? I put them in that encapsulated area. So preparing yourself means knowing and understanding what it takes to be capable in this society, in whatever career field choice that you desire, but also knowing that you undergird yourself by developing the skills and the degrees and the whatever it may be, certifications necessary to pivot if and when an industry begins to shift. So that's how they prepare. Process means going hard, as kids say, going hard at whatever the opportunities are that come your way. If it's going into plumbing, absolutely make sure you have your certification. Make sure you do your LCTI, your tech program, whatever that may be, but also enroll in the local community college so that you can continue to move your career forward, so that you can move into an entrepreneurial space and maybe own your own plumbing company one day. So hearing that continual piece of the story is really important. And I know that we're saying it in our minds, but I think we need to become explicit about how we do that, because that becomes their process and then ultimately how they proceed. And the proceeding is going into the career field with the knowledge and understanding that you're going to do this well, prepare your family, live your life, but also know and understand that 10 years from now, technology may look different, and you have to be able to pivot because you've gained the skills necessary while you were processing to move forward. All of this for me is against the backdrop of what I'll say becomes the social justice as the undergirding of our conversation. It's not enough to just have our next generation be fiscally stable and okay. We have to also prepare them to manage and to excel in spaces that our foreparents prepared us as a generation to go into college, go into the workforce, but to excel and really manage and control the narrative around our nation and our people as we develop moving forward. We have to make sure that our kids hear and understand that absolutely want you to have the full spectrum of job opportunities out there in the world. But no matter where you enter, you need to be prepared to exit 3 levels higher. And I think that becomes really key if we're going to help them grow their voices. It's not where you enter, it's what you do in the interim to prepare to exit 3 levels higher. And that becomes really clear, really important. And for our kids, I think they do hear it, but the more that we say it in those clear terms, I think they begin to internalize it. I think we begin to give them that social capital to know that it's okay to choose whatever you want to. Like I tell my kids here, as we're developing our college and career opportunities, I don't care what you do after high school. That's your job. My job is to prepare you to choose and to make sure that you have the opportunity to choose college, career, etc., and not have your options truncated because you didn't have proper preparation. So once you choose, then make sure you go be the best at it. but make sure that all the skills necessary to have choice and option in life are at the highest level. Because for a lot of our students, especially those coming from backgrounds, as the folk on this panel have communicated that we've come from, the wealth of choice is often not there for the children we serve. So we have to make sure they have choice, but then prepare to pivot when industry shifts.
Thank you for that. And I'm seeing in the chat, people are saying things like lifelong learning is the new norm. And I know one of our panelists said earlier that we have to really prepare our students to think critically. And so you said, Mr. Parker, choice. And so the only way that we will actually know that we have a choice, be confident enough to make a choice, know that the world has transformed and evolved to a point where choices are available to us, is to be well educated. So thank you very much for that. And Dr. Khalid Mumeen, back to you, sir. You know, as a college professor and advisor to students, I talk to students every day who say they've never considered a job as an engineer, never considered a job as a scientist, a mathematician, or anything that actually, any career that actually requires that they be excellent in math or science. And when I ask them why, I would say 90% of the time is because they say, I'm terrible at math. I'm terrible at science. And they're terrible at math and science in their mind. Usually it's because they skipped some steps in between, because certainly math is sequential. You miss a step and sometimes it's hard to catch up. But they really, really believe that they're bad at math. And I respond in many different ways. One of the things I say to them is that our ancestors were the pioneers of math and science. And excellence in math and science is our birthright. And I don't know how that always lands because of their overwhelming fear. So what do we need to do as educators in the early years to address this fear of math and science so that our students will begin to consider STEM careers?
First and foremost, it has to start systemically. As we know in education, the gateway into high school, into tracks, is math. Many of the challenges, and I've been in several districts throughout my career, and we look at standardized testing, and if the kid doesn't score X, they go down this track. But if they are high achievers, they go down another track, and they get they have more exposure and access. I think we have to combat those systemic roadblocks, first and foremost. Secondly, for students, students become conditioned at times by test scores. The test says that you are not able or have the ability to partake in a science or math field. That's where I push back against this notion. And I said it earlier, where we have to continue to make the process of education, we have to make it practical.
Yeah.
STEM looks very different. Science is very different than what it once was. Technology is forever evolving. Engineering, some of our students don't understand that some of the things that they're working on and they're decoding and things of that nature are part of engineering. And mathematics, it comes down, you start with, can you count? Can you count money? And they usually are like, yeah, I can count money. Well, that's a gateway. So I go back to thinking of the connection of making sure that we can inspire their interest, and you must have high expectations. I'm going way back to the mosaic of thought, where students, you press upon students, or you push them to make connections to the work. Text to text, text to self, text to world. That brings the big box of education or these tools and curriculum down to where they can package them and somewhat map their purpose onto those tools. It answers that question around the why. Why do I have to do this? Or, wow, I had no idea that this skill that I'm using when we were talking about coding, this skill that you're using is a well sought after skill internationally. We need to build that up. It's also about access to opportunity. I tell a story, an intrinsic story, is that looking at my career now and all these degrees that are hanging behind me, people think that I had a perfect educational journey. And that wasn't the case. My roadblock was the SAT. Why? Because I'd never seen any of that information on the SAT. I was a good student. I'm in the top 10% of my high school class. However, I never had exposure to the types of questions and material that was on that SAT. You have to provide access where you're looking at the whole student, where students can go back to the constructivist views of learning by doing. STEM is all about constructivism. It's learning by doing. We have to continually, as educators, invest in potential. We have to invest in potential in our children. You know, if the test doesn't fit, we must find something else. What makes this student tick? And you have to have tangible examples in front of our children so they can aspire to become. They have to see it to be it, or see it to become it. You have to have scientists in front of them, and engineers in front of them, and mathematicians in front of them on a regular basis, so they can say, wow, I understand where that person's coming from, and I can be like that when I grow up, so to speak. So it's unpacking tradition.
Yeah.
And it's not difficult for me to speak about this as a superintendent of schools because of my personal journey, but it helps me to recognize that there are systems in place that are glass ceilings for our children. One being, and I'm going to talk about the achievement gap. And you map the achievement gap onto the access gap, or the gap between poverty, the have and the have-nots. All of these things, and we're seeing it during this pandemic, are very much related to one another. And now they're being exacerbated now because of the times that we're living in now.
Yeah.
But for me to have a student here in the Reading School District that is taking Algebra 1 in 11th grade, the gap is there. Whereas when I was a principal in New Hope Solebury back in the early 2000s, I had kids taking trigonometry in 8th grade. Why? How? Is it because the student is smarter, or is it because, no. They had access. They had access to the information. And we taught to the access. It was regardless of what the curriculum was saying, what the boxed curriculum was saying. No, the student had an interest, had a curiosity, and we ran down that pathway with them. And look where they ended up at in 8th grade. And then their history, the story continues from that point forward. I believe it has to be about connectivity from the educator to the child being able to make connections with the teaching and curriculum and the pedagogical stances, all through the mosaic thought, text to text, text to self, text to world. Then once you have that interest sparked and ignited, then we have to push them to high expectations and push back against the narrative and have them equipped with an answer. Well, my mommy wasn't good in math, so I guess I'm not good in math. But guess what? You can be great in math, and then your mom will become good in math because you'll be able to take that information home and inform her, and she'll love it from you. So, I believe it's about connections, inspiring, access, and again, motivating students to reach their fullest potential.
I love that. Thank you so much. And there's a lot of research that speaks to this idea of growth mindset, and that Black and Latino students often have a fixed mindset, that they believe that either you're born smart or you're not. And then students outside of those cultures often believe that you can learn and grow. So we have to let our students know that just because you don't know it today doesn't mean you won't know it tomorrow. To teach them to have a growth mindset. Anything is possible. So thank you so much for sharing. Dr. Desak, the impact of COVID-19 is definitely multi-layered, it's multifaceted. However, one of the most overt symptoms of this virus is job loss. And so what needs to be done to assist our youth with preparing for those jobs that are both essential and lucrative? I say essential because we hear that the essential workers, hence the word essential, are working, whether those are trashmen or CNAs, nursing assistants, or any number of jobs that work with the elderly or the sick. These are not necessarily jobs that require high-level math and science, but there's so many mid-level jobs where, you know, many our fathers or mothers may have had. What do we do to prepare our students for essential jobs, the essential jobs that require mid-level or even the high-level skills that aren't necessarily STEM jobs?
That's a great question. And that's, you know, the answer is very fluid because because we're in unprecedented times, you know, the answer to that question is still something that's evolving. Today, case in point, today, August 17th, 2020, you have parents scrambling to figure out which, in K-12 arena in Pennsylvania, which school instructional style best meets my kids' needs. Should they do face-to-face instruction? Should they do hybrid? Should they go completely online? You have some schools, private schools that started today. You have college kids that moved on campus today. You have some universities where today was the first day of class. So, you know, this looks very different based on which student population we're talking about, whether we're talking about the K-12 population, whether we're talking about the collegiate level students. So it's a very, very interesting topic and very interesting dynamic. So there's no way that I can give an all-encompassing answer. You know, not every student goes to school for academic purposes. There's some students, and we, you know, my colleagues on the panel spoke to this. You know, there's some students that go to school for the arts. You have some school students that go to school for sports. You know, if I'm a varsity high school football player and this is my senior year and I need to have a breakout season in order to get to that Division I or Division II level, and then I find out that fall sports have been canceled, you know, how does that impact me as a student? How does that impact my motivation for being able to achieve what I need to achieve? Because again, that's my primary focus, you know? So it's a very, very comprehensive concern, you know. So how do we help students? What can we do? First of all, you know, some of the things that we mentioned earlier is to try to give students 21st century skills and opportunities, STEM-based instructional experiences, coding experiences, you know, preparing students for IT and healthcare jobs, financial related jobs where they can be competitive on the global economy. You know, we know that the lower wage service level jobs are gonna always be there. But if we really want to break the cycle for kids that are already in poverty experiences within their family that already experience generational poverty, how do we have them break through? We have to give them the instructional experiences. We can't assume that they're going to get it anywhere else than within the confines of the schooling experience. And it doesn't matter if it's a traditional brick and mortar face-to-face experience or it's a completely online virtual experience. You know, even colleges and universities, you know, really have been the leaders in the educational arena with virtual education because online degrees have been more so the a mainstay in the past 10 years, more so than you find at the K-12 arena. So you'll have kids that have gone through the entire K-12 experience through a face-to-face traditional schooling experience, and then now they have the opportunity to do online classes at the collegiate level, and we expect them to be able to have the skills to be successful. And they never had the exposure to it. They never were explicitly taught how to take ownership and take a leadership role in their own educational experience. We have to emphasize for children the importance of good written and oral communication. You know, we're in a society now where you can text an acronym, or I can send an emoji and that speaks 1,000 words of what I'm thinking. We have students that can speak it and can't write it. You know, so we have to make sure that we balance where students can articulate their thought process, but also can also put it in writing, and vice versa, but can still navigate the the main communications of their peers in society, where it may be acronyms or emojis or whatever have you. So we have to make sure that we emphasize the importance and the role of reading and building a vocabulary so that they can not only articulate their thought process, but also can write it. We need to also embrace technology. Technology has to be a supplement to the educational process, not supplant it, right? So with that being said, is the fact that we are teaching children that are digital natives. A lot of the children that we teach nowadays can wrap circles around us around technology, and that's great. But how are we honing that, and how are we tapping into that to really build their capacity to take ownership over their learning? I was having a conversation with a childhood friend of mine, and we were talking about, he said, hey buddy, you remember when we used to go to the downtown Manhattan library and put a nickel in the machine and print out the microfilm? Those days are over. Yeah. Now the technology is right in the palm of the children's hands, and they have access to it. But if we don't explicitly teach them how to do it, or how to utilize these tools to take over the learnership, their learning, we're missing the boat. It's one thing to put machines or technology in children's hands. It's another thing to teach them explicitly how to utilize it. Because if we don't teach them how to use it, what are they going to do? They're going to be on YouTube. They're going to be on Wikipedia. They're going to be on all of the places that the fountains of misinformation, if you will. All right, they're not going to be in JSTOR. They're not going to be in digital databases. They're not going to be in pulling research-based or evidence-based articles or journal articles and that sort of thing. So we got to make sure that we're building those foundational skills that can allow students to be able to pivot or transition. Because when one door opens, we want the educational experiences that we give to kids to be able to create another opportunity. We can't have students that they're putting all of their eggs in one basket and they're very one track, or they don't have skills that can translate to the needs of not only the society or the job market or the community or whatever have you. Yeah. And most importantly, you know, when we made the shift from No Child Left Behind to Every Student Succeed, we talked about college and career readiness. And it can't just be a talking point. It has to be something that we truly work towards and ascribe to in all of our pedagogical processes, all of our teaching and learning processes at the school level, parents at home. They have to reinforce the fact that we have to teach skills that will allow students to be successful and working towards a clear path towards college and careers. It can't just be lip service. It has to be something that we are that's actionable. And Professor Dunbar Keys mentioned a growth mindset. It has to work towards that growth mindset. So I know I didn't do that topic any, full service, but again, you know, this COVID-19 situation, you know, is very fluid, and we're going to have to quickly translate some of the lessons that we learned on wave 1 for wave 2, which is expected, October through January.
Yeah.
You know, so it's work to be determined, and it's going to be very fluid. But at the end of the day, we can't have a generation of kids that lost out on a meaningful education, because for a lot of kids, education is really life or death. If they miss out on the educational process, or they miss out on the teaching and learning process, or an opportunity for empowerment because of COVID, we have to turn this this challenge and this dilemma into a new renewed opportunity.
Yeah. No, I think you did great with that answer. I mean, this is a new situation for everyone, and we're all learning to navigate this space. Just the fact that we're all on Zoom now, our students, our children may be able to understand technology to a greater capacity than what we do. But I know for a fact there are people who are as well educated as all of you are, and they're not able to make this transition on to Zoom. So now technology has become a utility, like a telephone. It's essential part of our lives. So I think you did wonderfully with that answer. Everyone, I just want to bring your attention to the fact that it's 8 o'clock and we are finishing at 8:30. We have a few more questions to go. So I would like for you all, if possible, to keep your answers a bit brief so we can get through these next questions. So thank you all very much. Dr. Seaton, this question is especially for you. Oftentimes when we talk about equity, when we talk about incarceration, when we talk about policing, we are speaking about Black boys. And all of you are men, and so all of you can speak to the experience of Black boys, but what about Black girls? What about little Black girls? What can we do to ensure that their mental, emotional, and physical lives are whole? What can we do as educators to provide for the holistic growth and development of Black girls?
Hey, I love that question. One of the things that I want to start off with is that what's important for the developmental milestones that are important for boys are the same developmental milestones that are important for girls. So essentially answering the question, who am I? How do I show up in the world? How do people perceive me? And how do I want to be perceived? So boys and Black boys and girls are really trying to answer these fundamental developmental questions. And so the challenge becomes that Blackness is under assault. And so it's not allowed, the development of Black adolescence is not allowed to happen under sort of normative conditions. So what is normative? But I want to suggest that our role, and we need to do more of this, is to provide a space for girls to explore who they are, how they're perceived, and who they want to become. To the dismay, I was working with a church group of young adults. I made them cringe last week, where I told them that part of my job as the father of a Black girl was to listen to WAP and with my daughter and engage in critical media literacy. And so for traditional church folks, oh my God. But for me, it was all about creating a space to do what I knew she was going to do anyway.
That's right.
And so how do we provide quality information for there to be some back and forth? So
what is WAP, Dr. Seaton? I don't know what WAP is.
Well, I won't use the pejorative, but wet behind vagina.
Oh, wow.
It's a new, he tried to set me up. He knows what that is. But new song, Cardi B, Megan Thee Stallion. Two things that were important for my daughter to understand. One is that culture is set up to commodify sexuality in general, but Black sexuality in particular.
Yeah.
And so we have to understand, like, if this song is going to shape who you are, understand that somebody's getting paid off of it at your expense.
That's right.
Number two is that I didn't want to come off too judgmental as the guy that listened to Two Live Crew, NWA, Cool G Rap back in the day, where there were a number of young black men rapping about their penises and how over-sexualized they were in their own sexual prowess. So if we are going to over-sexualize sort of black gender identity, it's an equal opportunity sport. But the third thing was that when we engage in this sport, we do destruction to the community, potentially in ways where people can't differentiate art, entertainment in the context of commodification of black sexuality.
Yeah.
So having my daughter understand the complexity of that, and that she has to navigate how she wants to show up and be perceived. And I'm here as support, but she gets to make those choices. So the question then becomes, how do we systematize that framing, that support, and that opportunity for young boys and girls to make informed choices about identity? And part of that is really emphasizing the social in social justice. So how do we create spaces and opportunities, whether those are religious organizations, civic organizations, equipping parents to have real conversation where kids can explore different domains and aspects of their identity. I'll close it here. I grew up in North Philly, guy down the street named Tony. Tony had me thinking that, Tony said when I first heard about sex, Tony had sex for 3 days straight. And so I'm like, wow, how you gonna do? I didn't know. Tony was lying. So where do we go to get good information about basic principles around identity and be able to disentangle all of the garbage that's surrounding Black masculinity, Black sexuality?
Wow. Wow.
I love that. We could actually do an entire panel on that, Mr. Lassiter. So thank you for that. There's so much to say, but we're moving forward, and I don't want to take up too much time. Chad, you were saying?
No, I was just saying powerful.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And so that brings me back to you, Mr. Lassiter. I talk to Black children every day who are just scared. They're completely afraid. They don't know how to express their fear. They pick up on the fear of their parents, and their parents don't really want to express what their fear is. A lot of this is the effects of COVID-19. A lot of it is the effects of police violence. And a lot of it is just seeing their friends shot in the streets and not really even understanding the dynamics of any of it. So some of our youth have people with whom they can process all of this, their thoughts and their feelings, but many don't. And so is there a space in education where we can help students process their fears, their thoughts and feelings around everything that is happening in the world today?
Great question. I just want to add some levity to the moment. Dr. Seaton, you notice how all the three before mentioned educators, their answers were like 10, 15 minutes. And then when she gets to you and I, the verbalization is, we're at the 8 o'clock hour. You know, you notice that, my brother?
You're like, hurry up and shut up. Yeah.
You know,
but with that superintendent up there at Allentown, the superintendent in Reading, and my dear brother with the state, you know, they just went in. You know, it was like 15 and a half minutes, and I love those brothers. But nonetheless, I'll be very brief with the 2 minutes that I've been given. Now it's down to 1.
Well, wait a minute. I have to say that's because you're my boy, and you know that.
No, but I think a lot of what everyone has said continues to intersect with all of the questions, and just, you know, your brilliance of just moderating this and making sure that they're interwoven with the emergent theme of social justice is just apropos. I think multiple things. One, I think that we have to be very frank about the racial trauma that exists because of a parent who may have been working but now is unemployed, a parent who was unemployed and now may have got contracted COVID, a nana, a mom, a grandmom, a poppy who may have had a pre-existing condition like type 2 diabetes or whatever the case may be that led to COVID-19, maybe sending them to the next phase of their development, however they identified the hereafter much earlier. I think that the young people have to have what we intellectualize and we call hermeneutics or matters of interpretation. That's Dr. Greg Seaton's work. But fundamentally, it's just having frank conversations about the trauma that exists because of the viewing of George Floyd, that visual, but also what happened to Ahmaud Arbery. If young people have seen that visual, we can't escape it. You know, young people, they have access to cell phones. They have access to things that we didn't have access to when we were coming up. But nonetheless, I think that there has to be conversations in the home, in the community, however we identify community. That could be a masjid, that can be a temple, that can be a church, that can be a synagogue. I fundamentally do understand, and I get it, that community centers are shuttered, right? But we have to find an innovative way for young people to express the vicarious traumatization that they're experiencing against the backdrop of all of the things that they have already endured, i.e. generational traumas, i.e. the poverty that they live under. Not wanting to paint a picture of pathology, nor do I want to engage in a form of victimization. But I think that when you look at what Dr. Mumeen has done in the Reading School District, and I'm very aware of what Dr. Parker Thomas and his team has done, I think that even though we're getting ready to, we've started the school year, there are opportunities, even if it's not in the classroom, to take the pedagogy and move it to social justice, to have conversations about how can you juxtapose what happened that you are aware of, or educate them on what they need to be aware of, and to listen intently around the things that they're trying to tell us, and then also correlate it to what they see in their communities. These young people come to school traumatized after seeing someone killed or hearing that one of their friends were murdered over the weekend. The first thing we do on Monday is we simply say, hey, let's teach our pedagogy. Instead of simply saying, hey, let's bring a cohort of young people into the auditorium for an assembly around trauma. More school social workers, more counselors, more school psychologists, doing it from a culturally relevant standpoint. I've been practicing social work for 25 years, as you know. As a therapist, a lot of your work around wellness, holistic, spiritual wellness. I think we have to also recognize that we can't run away from this moment. These young people will teach us about the moment. And so we have to have what I call therapeutic community interventionists who actually can be dispatched as a vanguard to certain schools to really deal with the racial elephants, and specifically white racism, white supremacy, and how whiteness affords an opportunity for the mob to get off, but those who are mobbed, nothing happens to them. So young people are very aware of these things, and for those young people who are not aware of it, we need wiser owls in the village that will make matters and interpret what they're experiencing at this particular point in time. I'm very concerned about what we see right now. If you take Philadelphia as a county, there's a lot of despair, there's a lot of hopelessness. Summing it up is the nihilistic threat that Cornel West talked about in Race Matters has to be dealt with. And I think from a therapeutic standpoint, we have to be able to engage young people. That looks like big brothers, big sisters. That looks like mentoring programs. That looks like after school programming, even in the moment that we find ourselves in. The young people will tell us how they can connect virtually, how we can social distance with them and still be with them. And lastly, I'll simply say, all of this for me is really reduce intellectual stuff aside to what my grandmother used to say, that as a young person, young people want to know that we care before they care to know what we know. Young people want to know that we care before they care to know what we know. And so we have to listen to them, we have to learn from them, but we cannot run away from this moment of having a white supremacist in the White House against the backdrop of educational apartheid, economic injustice, the violence that we see in all communities. For Dr. King said, the greatest purveyor of violence is my own United States government. So not getting caught up in this whole aspect of black on black violence. People kill people that they live in close proximity to. I'm concerned about the generational trauma that has been activated because of this moment, and then further, the vicarious traumatization that young people are going to experience. Lastly, when you look at Mumin, when you look at Parker, when you look at their districts, when you look at the ever-growing demographics, I defer to the brilliant work that these two human beings who live in the black body have to be educators and have to compartmentalize and engage in a form of racial neutrality against the backdrop of all this stuff that's happening. And I know that their districts are equipped, and anyone who's listening to this who does not know Superintendent Parker and Superintendent Mumin, I would encourage you to really, really look at the models that they have in the past, models that will be created to help your district, because that's the only way that we're going to have to be able to get out of this moment that we find ourselves in, which is perpetual trauma.
Thank you, Mr. Lassiter. You know, we have about 2 more rounds of questions. I'm wondering if you want me to skip 1 round. It's 8:15 right now.
Yeah, why don't we go to the very last question, leaving last words from this esteemed August body. We want to be mindful that it is the DNC, but we're important as well. But we also want to just thank everyone who has been viewing this. So why don't we wrap up with the very last question, if that's okay?
Okay, I certainly will. Thank you so much. To conclude, I'd like to do exactly what I did in the beginning, which is ask you all the same question. And that is that in the 21st century, again, 20 years into the 20th century, 6 months in lockdown because of a virus, unprecedented for most people who are alive now. I just said people don't know, particularly children, don't know how to process it. When we come back to school, and that's whether we have face-to-face classes in September or not until January or even later, we really don't know. We're going to have different students on our hands. So that coupled with the change in jobs, the job loss and the new jobs that are emerging, what advice would you give, an essential piece of advice that you would give to our youth? I'd just like to hear from each one of you. What is the most important thing that you could say to our youth about making these adjustments to the new world? So we'll start with you, Mr. Parker.
Wow, that's a serious question. I think when we look at the backdrop of everything that's happening in our nation, the number one thing that we can tell our youth is that we love you and we hear you. Right? So everything else that happens, everything that becomes a part of what's to be done, has to start with we love you and we hear you. Dr. Lassiter just said it better than anyone could, the way Granny put it. They don't care what you know until they know that you care. So what I think our kids see, you know, as a parent of a teenager myself, I think what our kids are seeing and what they're watching on TV and seeing in the political nature of the world right now is that their voices and their experiences are being marginalized, either covertly or overtly. And we as a community of leaders, this village, have to create a space for them that's safe. And we have to make sure that they know we love them, they know we hear them. And once we do that, then we can engage them around what the next steps are for them to be able to address, challenge, and build what their vision for success is in this new world. But until we set that foundation, then I think a lot of the next steps become nugatory because they won't be able to really listen and engage because this world has disenfranchised them in a number of ways. So I know that my colleagues are about to come back and share some high-level next steps, and I fully support. I think we set the floor in terms of I love you, I hear you, and know that we are willing to listen and engage our kids on multiple levels.
Thank
Wow.
you so much. I appreciate that. And Dr. Desak, what is your piece of advice that you would give?
No, thank you again for a great opportunity and a great dialogue. And, my lasting words is to students is, find your passion, and you have to follow your passions and your interests. And regardless of what's happening within society, regardless of what's happening in the political, social, cultural landscape of this country, all of us have a purpose, and you have to figure out what it is that is going to drive you and wake you up in the morning and allow you to continue to grow and give back. So if you're not following your path or your passion or your interests, you're missing it. So not only is it for the intrinsic value that it gives us, or but also really the ability to help and serve others. Again, for personal and professional satisfaction, I echo the students all the time: follow your passion, follow your interests, follow your love, and you can't go wrong.
Yes, I love that. Thank you so much. And Dr. Mumeen, what are your insights? What is the piece of advice that you would give to our students to prepare?
Well, first and foremost, it begins with the leadership. We have to be culturally responsive leaders in central office and in the classroom, so that we can provide a sense of hope for our children. And what I mean by hope, and breaking it down by acronym, is hope itself, but also making sure that we're committed to open access, passionate action, and empathy for our young people. Because when we get to that point, then we're able to be the conduits of positive, long-lasting, sustainable information, similar to what Nelson Mandela said. Education is the most powerful weapon you can use to change the world. And our kids want to change the world right now. They're home. Many of them want to be in school. Many of them want to continue on this educational journey. And they feel as though, there are factors, the system, what have you, that is holding them back. We have to be convincing as these advocates of, being these pillars of hope, open access, professionalism, and empathy, that we're able to drive these messages home. So what that means for the kids is, and what I would say to them is, or what I do say to them is, you have to continually believe in your why. You have to continually believe in your goals. We talked about this at our last graduation. They have to have this insatiable hunger to be successful, whatever that is. Insatiable hunger. How that maps onto our kids now, how it resonates with them. We say you got to have that Mamba mentality. Well, what is the Mamba mentality? It's that insatiable hunger to achieve your goals. They have to work hard. They have to do it with passion. And don't be afraid. They have to have the confidence to exercise their voices in this process.
Yeah.
Malcolm Gladwell in the book Outliers talks about one of the pillars of giftedness is the ability to question your learning.
Wow.
But at times, especially in schools, you're not allowed to question the learning. You're an outlier for sure, but going the opposite way. We have to infuse kids to continually question their learning, and also question the system, because we are here for them.
Thank you so much for that, because most of I shouldn't say most, but many of our leaders are people who question everything. People who question the system, people who question their teachers, and we don't often provide space for those radical minds. And so part of what educators do is we bring out the genius in people. We bring out the best in them. And so I love that you said that. Thank you so much. And Dr. Seaton, what are your final words?
I typically tell kids, one, you have value. So there's a gift and contribution that only you can make. And I follow that up with the fact that your voice matters, but at every step of the way, just because you have voice doesn't mean that you're saying something of value. So how do you begin to say something of value?
Yes.
There is no substitute for the grind. There's no substitute for work. So you have to do the work so that when your voice, when you speak, that you're saying something of substance. We live in an information age. If you want to know something, you Google it, you YouTube it, but you have to be thirsty for the information. And then the last thing is that you're not alone. You have a village. It's really about us connecting with you, you connecting with us, or creating your own village. You are not alone.
That's very important because people feel alone so often. And so they need to know that they have people, they have a village. We can echo what was said earlier, that we are the village for them. So thank you, Dr. Seaton. And then finally, Mr. Lassiter, final words.
Yeah, I would like to do what they do with the United States Congress and the United States Senate, which is yield my time back. I don't want to leave this space without Dr. Mumeen, Thomas Parker, Dr. Seaton, and Dr. DeQuay answering, if it's okay with you as the moderator, question number 3 that was for Dr. Mumeen. I just feel in my spirit that this is a very powerful and impactful question. And I just also feel that the greater spirit is speaking to my humanity, that these 4 could really leave us as we go into the rest of this week, as well as the upcoming fall, with this question, which is, although equity and inclusion are essential, most trainings do not address the racial identity development of African American students. What needs to be done with curriculum, instruction, and activities to liberate our children's minds from the stronghold of internalized racial oppression? And I also want to manipulate the environment, because everything that Dr. Mumeen says and Thomas Parker says and Dr. DeQuay says and Greg Seaton says, I'm going to take it and plagiarize it. I'm going to plagiarize it as if I said it. But if we could just end with each of them, if it's okay with you, Layla, tackling that question. So I want to yield my last remarks back to the 4 of them.
So I believe that the question was already addressed by one of our panelists.
Oh, was it? I'm sorry.
About internalized racial oppression. I'm going back to the question. Yeah, Dr. Mumeen, that was addressed to him.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. But do you still want everyone to speak?
Yeah, if we could end on that. I'm sorry.
Okay. So we can start with Dr. Seaton. Did you hear that question?
Yes, ma'am. I think that there's an importance in connecting both the historical and the psychological. So one, saying that, framing for them that academic greatness, academic and intellectual prowess is part of their ancestral DNA and part of their heritage. 2, pointing out for them in terms of sort of critical literacy and their own psychology, is that this world, in many ways, white supremacy is set up to tell you who you can't become or who you are not. And it's really about being strategic. When you're old enough to be strategic about what it is that you fuel yourself with, you have to begin to fuel yourself with a counter narrative about what your possibilities are, what your intellectual acumen is, what your potential is as well. But for the adults, it's really about creating opportunity and space to be aggressively anti-oppressive in terms of setting possibilities and supports for youth, but it's also about creating opportunities and space for discovery and mastery.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Will you complete, Dr. Seaton?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay,
I got the perfect. I got it.
Thank you. And then Dr. Mumeen, I know you answered that question before. Do you feel complete?
I think just to capture this succinctly, for what needs to be done with curriculum and instruction activities, we have to take advantage of the moment, thus take advantage of the movement.
Mm.
Social unrest or unrest, societal unrest. There's always a why. In education, we have to take the time to slow down to understand the why. Take advantage of the moment. Take advantage of the movement. And then you be able to use that information to map it on to how we deliver curriculum and instruction.
Yeah.
Because this isn't going away by itself no time soon.
No, it's
Wow.
not. Thank you so much, Dr. Moline. And Mr. Parker, do you want me to step?
Absolutely. So I will underline, circle, and highlight everything that has been said by the panel, and I'll add just a little bit extra to the discourse, because curriculum and instruction don't happen in a vacuum. So part of this is, how do you create the conditions that allows for change, and then for change to be implemented in a way that is sustainable? And I come back to two structures. One is funding, and the second is accountability. As long as the systems of accountability still exist in this educational environment where we're measuring knowledge, impact, and success by the SATs and whatever other tests, the ACTs and BETs, whatever test you want, then we're going to continue down the path of having the curriculum aligned to having students be successful on that test, because the school's very existence is rooted in whether or not the children can do better on the test than they did last year. So if you're looking to switch curriculum, then you also have to switch what the accountability measures are, because that's going to drive, which is my second piece, the systems and the funding. So the second piece to that, once you make sure that you address the accountability systems that are driving curriculum to be what it is, second is going to be funding. In many of the districts that serve the children and the babies that look like me and look like y'all, there are some disparate issues in terms of funding that mitigate the school's ability to address some of those issues in a meaningful way. So great vision, great action. It's the power, it's the movement, as Dr. Moline said, spot on. But if you can't close the books fiscally, then it's going to eliminate your ability to address the needs of kids in a meaningful way. So how do we address accountability so that that doesn't become an issue that impacts our ability to really make some of those transitions that Dr. Moline and Dr. G spoke about? And then secondly, how do we ensure that children that are Black and brown and growing up in Allentown and Reading and Philly and et cetera have access to curriculum and instruction by nature of the systems being funded in a way that allow people to make those decisions and implement reform in a meaningful and sustainable way?
Wow. Wow.
Thank you. Thank you for being so thorough and complete. I definitely appreciate that, Mr. Parker. Thank you so much. And Dr. Desak, how do we address curriculum and internalized racial oppression?
So there has to be a paradigm, it has to be a mindset shift where we not only expect educators to value the learning, they have to value the learner. Because if the students don't have value, or if they're not a part of the classroom or the district or the school environment, then there's going to be inequities, right? Because there's going to be different values that some children feel that they have, or a sense of ownership, or a sense of belonging, whereas others don't. So there has to be a value where, you know, I am more than just, you know, a label, or I am more than just some sort of artificial tag that's placed on me by, you know, a classroom or a school or a district, or I'm more than, you know, a member of this reading group, or a member of this, grade level, you know, I'm class 2A. You know, I have to be more than that. I have to be an individual that has value, and that can make a meaningful contribution to the greater organization, whether it's the classroom, whether it's the school, whether it's the district. So we have to, you know, go back to the importance of building healthy and effective relationships between not only student, teacher, that sort of thing. And, you know, it's a constant fluid thing where not only do we have to ensure that there's a growth mindset in our teachers and our educators, with constant revision and looks at not only the pedagogical process and that sort of thing, but also giving them skills and trainings on cultural proficiency, on growth mindset, on all of the research-based and evidence-based best practices. You know, Dr. Mumin talked about the now. Well, guess what? The now is going to have a new narrative. So if we don't go back and tap into the now to reflect the curriculum or the curricula that was of the past, then we're missing it. So we have to take advantage of the moment by not only growing as individuals, but also improving the processes and systems that support our schools and our districts as well.
Thank you so much. We appreciate that. And Mr. Lassiter, did you have any final words before I conclude this evening?
Yes, I just want to thank you for sisterhood and for moderating this. And I want to thank each of the panelists for brotherhood. When we first decided that we wanted to do something, it was about 4 months ago. It was a pregnant moment. And I'm just really overwhelmed that we gave birth to this reality. And it certainly won't be the last time that we partner with one another. And I just want to personalize things by simply saying that, you know, our narratives matter. You know, when we first were on the call, there was no toxic masculinity, no machismo, no cool pose, no bravado. It was just raw. You know, we were learning about, you know, Thomas in Mississippi and where he came from. We was learning what Khalil was sharing, and what Khalid and Greg was sharing. And though Khalid and I grew up in the same community, to be on that call and to recapture some of the essence of those moments was just very, very rewarding. And Greg Seaton and I, over the past 20 years, have been very vulnerable with one another, with our narratives, but also to be on that call initially and to hear about some things that I didn't know, and some things that he had to hear that he didn't know for the first time in 20 years. I just want to thank each of the panelists just for a lot of the things that are developing in the chat, how fluid and organic this conversation was, how humble each of us were, how authentic we brought our authentic selves to the context. But I want to end by just simply saying that, you know, Khalid and I are not, or none of us are exceptions to the rule. There were a lot of great people who came out of Hunting Park, whether they went on to the colleges that we went to, or if they just became really good people in a democracy that raised their children to be good people in the democracy. The golden rule, which has been expanded. The golden rule used to be treat people the way you want to be treated, but it's been expanded to treat people the way you were not treated. Some of us were treated bad. We grew up in communities and in families where we know people who've been sexually abused, sexually molested, individuals who have been victims, and we viewed it, or victims ourselves, of intimate partner violence, domestic violence. But even in the midst of all of that, there are factors of resiliency, and that's not all that we were. There are emerging him with a profound love. And I want to say to Dr. Greg Seaton that I love him with a profound love. And what I want to say to you is that I love you with a profound love. And what I want to say to the last two panelists is that as I get to know you, I will also love you all with a profound love. And to everyone who's viewing this, this really was what Martin Luther King and Rabbi Abraham Yeshua Heschel called the beloved community. That even on a night like the DNC, you gave up of yourselves, your family, however you identify family, to come into this sacred space to hear our narratives. And you got our intellectual side, but the call that we had that led up to us giving birth to this was pain, grief, the cycles of grief, the cycles of pain. But we use that in a way where we're able to be transformative in the roles that we are in. And what you have is Black men in powerful roles, but we're just everyday brothers. We're right. What Curtis Mayfield calls a new world order. And a new world order from this level is really about creating safe spaces for Black and brown and our white colleagues so that they can get an education that's afforded to them, however we're identifying education with that passport. Just want to just thank, you know, every single panelist here, and want to thank you, Layla, and want to thank everyone who you viewed this. These tears that you see are tears of joy, but tears also of pain, pain for our democracy, that it becomes a paradigm shift in which it's all inclusive of everybody, transgender, LGBT, Jewish, atheist, agnostic, Scientologist, Muslim, Christian, it doesn't matter. We have a long journey ahead. And so I'm looking forward to working with you, brothers, and with you, Layla, and multiple individuals on this Zoom who we've already been working in this space. My dear sister, Tammy Ferguson, I love you, my dear sister. And so everybody have a wonderful evening and also a blessed upcoming week. And thank you for just supporting our initiative this evening.
Just some closing words. Thank you, Chad. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here tonight. Thank you for this discussion. Thank you again for, yes, what Dr. King calls the beloved community, this opportunity for us to get together in love of culture, in love of humanity, in order to bring our knowledge bring our knowledge together so that we can uplift each other and uplift humanity. We are grateful for the opportunity to share, to learn, to expand our awareness in the journey towards educational justice in the United States. We've been fed and motivated to do our part in order to continue this legacy. Thank you, Chad, our host tonight, the Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission, for all the work that you do to keep us informed. We know that we are at a critical time in history, and most of us who are present this evening, I'm trusting we are present because we want to do more, and we were educated, we were enlightened, we were uplifted and empowered to do more work. And so I just want to leave everybody with these words to remember that whatever is yours to do, you must do it right now. Thank you. Peace and love, everyone. God bless.
Thank you all.